Hello Kanto University, this is Mr. Lala Baba, and welcome to Pokemon Competitive Bios. Today's Pokemon is Lucario. Lucario is a combination fighting and steel type, and was founded in Generation 4. It is also in the OU, and that stands for Overused Tier. Now before I start this episode, I would like to make something clear about the grading system that wasn't very clear last time. And that is that these grades are in perspective to the rest of this Pokemon's tier. It doesn't necessarily mean the metagame as a whole, just the tier that this Pokemon's in. So I hope that clears a little thing up. So let's get into this part. So of course, with Lucario, I am going to be taking a look at its stats, move pool, abilities, typing, counters, and then giving it an overall grade. All of these, of course, are going to be letter grades, and then I'm going to suggest a set that you could run on the Pokemon featured in the video, of course, Lucario this time, to be successful in competitive play. So let's start off with Lucario's stats. Lucario, I chose to give an A-, and you'll see its stats on screen right now. Now, as you'll notice, it has very good attacking stats, both physical and special attack are very good. Its speed is also passable. It can outspeed plenty of things, though it is not the fastest Pokemon, so that should definitely be noted, and that's one of the reasons why this doesn't get a great stat grade, is because its speed is not necessarily the best, but both of its attacking stats are something that you'd see for sweepers, but the speed doesn't really back that up. But again, its attacking stats are very good, and its speed is passable, and its speed, again, could be a lot better, and it's rather frail. Its defenses are not really great, though it does have a decently defensive typing with Steel type, but we'll get into that later. Just strictly going on stats, I chose to give Lucario an A-. Now moving on to Lucario's move pool. Now Lucario, I chose to give a move pool grade of an A, and here's why. It gets same type attack bonus from close combat, and Aura Sphere, and also things like Focus Punch. Now it's a bit difficult to run Focus Punch on a Lucario because of how frail it is, but again, just the fact that it's there makes this move pool very diverse, and it gets type coverage from things like Psychic, Zen Headbutt, Earthquake, and just plenty of things. Like Ice Punch, that can help with big threats that can counter this thing, but again, we'll get into that later. Its diversity of coverage is just great with things like Dark Pulse, Dragon Pulse, Thunder Punch, Blaze Kick. I can go on and on with these moves. This thing just has a rather diverse move pool. Again, not the most diverse and not the most helpful, because some of these moves are very difficult to run on a Gliscor on a Lucario, because of just its overall how you use it. But just the fact that those are there makes this a very diverse move pool, and that's why I chose to give Lucario a grade of an A. Now moving on to abilities. This is the big downfall of Lucario for sure. I chose to give Lucario an abilities grade of a D. And that's because its abilities are just not very usable. It actually gets 3. Those are Steadfast, Inner Focus, and Justified. Now Steadfast, what that is going to do, it can be kind of useful. That's going to raise Lucario's speed every time it flinches, but then you'd have to rely on getting flinched in order for that ability to take effect, so that can be very unreliable. Inner Focus prevents flinching, so that can be helpful against Fake Out and other things like that that you'd usually see on a lead, but a lead Lucario is a little bit strange to run, I must say, so Inner Focus may not exactly be the best. And Justified can be helpful if you switch into a Dark-type move or something like that, but it requires a lot of prediction. And on special sets, it's completely pointless, because all it does is raise your attack. So if you're running a special set Lucario, then that Justified boost is completely pointless. It will not help you whatsoever. But again, on mixed sets and on physical sets, Justified can be a very good ability. So I'm not trying to take anything away from Lucario's abilities, but they're just not the best, and this thing actually gets a really bad grade in terms of abilities. They're somewhat usable, but they're not the best. So that's why I chose to give Lucario a D when it comes to abilities. And moving on to typing. Typing, I'm going to give an A-. Now, that is mostly because it gets 9 resistances on top of having an immunity to poison. Now, that immunity to poison is huge because that eliminates the possibility of Toxic Stall, which is kind of prominent in OU right now. I'm seeing a lot of Toxic Stall, but with being a Steel type, Lucario gets an immunity to that, which is very, very helpful. But the problem is, Steel-type is not a very good offensive type, though it is very decent defensively, but Lucario is not exactly a defensive Pokemon, so having the Steel-typing, of course the attacking moves are not exactly the best. You can get things like Bullet Punch for priority, but, you know, to also get same type attack bonus, but it's just, it doesn't have the best base power, and Lucario mostly relying on sweeping is going to, it's just going to be very difficult to use stuff like that. Now, moving on to counters, I chose to give Lucario an A- when it comes to counters. Now, some of the counters you'll see right off the bat against Lucario are definitely Gliscor and Hippowdon. You can have other counters, but you kind of have to reach down, and by reach down, I mean using Pokemon from lower tiers than OU in order to counter Lucario. And because Lucario is not exactly the most prominent threat in OU, you're not really going to see that happening a lot, so countering this thing can be pretty difficult. Hippowdon can definitely sponge a lot of hits that Lucario can deal out, but that is only if it doesn't get a lot of stat boosts up, and the most common set you see of Lucario is usually a Swords Dance set, so at, you know, +4 or +6, Lucario can really do massive amounts of damage to Hippowdon, and can even, I haven't calculated this, but it could probably, possibly one-hit Hippowdon, despite it being very, very bulky, but a +6 Lucario with something like Close Combat is nothing to mess with. And Gliscor, if you don't run Ice Punch on your Lucario, can easily wall it. Now, of course, it can't Toxic Stall it due to being a ground type, but if it's a Gliscor running something like EQ, and the only way you have to attack it is with stuff like Extreme Speed and Close Combat, you're not going to get the job done because of those resistances that Gliscor has and because of its very high defense stat. Now, some of the Pokemon that could be brought up from lower tiers are things like Quagsire and Sableye. Sableye can do tricky stuff like Will-O-Wisp, which would render Lucario basically pointless on a physical set. And, of course, Quagsire can take somewhat of a hit, definitely from a Lucario, and it can EQ it and possibly one-hit it because Lucario, again, is weak to that ground typing due to being a Steel type, and it also is rather frail. So that is why things like Sableye and Quagsire on top of Hippowdon and Gliscor could counter Lucario, but again, because of the reach down that you have to do, and because Hippowdon's not the most reliable counter, and Gliscor can easily be matched with something like Ice Punch, Lucario is a rather difficult Pokemon to counter, so that is why I chose to give it a grade of an A-. And now that we have gotten all that, it is time to give Gliscor an overall grade, and I chose to go with a B+. It's very hard to counter, and it is immune to Toxic Stall. That is huge, because Toxic Stall is very prominent in OU right now, so being immune to that is very beneficial. Its abilities are very unreliable. That kind of brought down its grade a lot, but it has good mixed stats. You can really use this thing for a lot of different, or for multiple purposes when it comes to physical and special moves, and it has a very diverse move pool on top of that, so it's just a very diverse Pokemon. You can use it in multiple ways, and that's why, well, that's really what saves this thing's grade. Despite having really bad abilities, and, you know, its stats aren't the best, mostly because of its speed, but it does still scrape up a B+, in my opinion. Now, don't get me wrong, the language I'm using is not to suggest that Lucario's not a good Pokemon. Of course, it is OU, but this grade is comparative to the rest of OU, and I chose to give Lucario a B+. And now it's time for the part of the video that I like to call Mr. Lala Bubba Suggests. This is where I suggest a set that you could run on the Pokemon featured in the video to be successful in competitive play. Of course, today's is going to be Lucario. So I'm going to start explaining this set by explaining the EVs. And that is going to be 252 into attack, 252 into speed, and 4 into HP. That is going to allow for physical sweeping, of course. Its ability, I chose Inner Focus. You could also go for Justified. I wouldn't suggest Steadfast, but Inner Focus and Justified are going to be of equal use, though unfortunately that's not going to be much use. But still about of equal use. The item is going to be the Life Orb. That's going to take a little bit of your HP, but it's going to boost the damage that you do with your attacks. And the nature is adamant. That is going to lower your special attack and raise your attack. Of course, you're not going to need that special attack for Lucario because you're only going to be using physical moves and you're running a physically based set. And this is a standard Swords Dance set Lucario. And so the moves that you're going to be running on this are Swords Dance, Close Combat, Extreme Speed, and Ice Punch. Now, Ice Punch you could trade out for something like Bullet Punch, but Ice Punch is going to hit Gliscor, and that's the big thing, because Gliscor can be a huge, huge counter to Lucario, so that's why you're going to want to have Ice Punch on this Lucario set. I would suggest it, though you can use Bullet Punch for things like Gengar that would naturally outspeed you, and you can't get priority on it by using Extreme Speed, of course, because it is immune. Now, Swords Dance is going to raise your attack 2 stages each time you use it, so getting a few of those up could be very, very beneficial to doing sweeping with this set. And of course, Extreme Speed for anything that's not a Ghost type is going to be very, very helpful, because if you have a couple of Swords Dances up, you can Extreme Speed to anything, of course, that doesn't resist it or is not immune to it. You're going to be doing a lot of damage, and you're going to have priority with that damage. And Close Combat, of course, gets same type attack bonus, and it's just massive damage. It's got a lot of base power, and plus those stat boosts, it's going to be a very scary set to go against if this thing gets up a Swords Dance or 2 or even 3 to boost it up to a full +6. So this Lucario set can be a huge threat if you run it correctly and if you make the right plays, but of course that applies to any set on any Pokemon. And that about sums up how to use this set. Now, of course, be aware you're going to be losing HP each time that you do damage because of the Life Orb, so keep that in mind when you're using the set. So feel free to leave some feedback, try using it, and of course leave some feedback and let me know how that worked out for you. And yeah, that's basically it for this set. And that's also going to be it for this installment of Pokemon Competitive Bios. If you have a Pokemon that you'd like to see featured in a video here, please remember to leave a comment down below and leave some feedback down below as well. And subscribe to this channel if you enjoyed this video, and a link to my channel will be in the description. And as always, once again, thank you guys for watching. Peace out.